Hi, Kathy here, and we're going to talk about type and how it is used in conjunction with image in this video. So I want to start off with a favorite quote of mine by Paula Scher, a very interesting designer in type. Words have meaning and type has spirit, and the combination is spectacular. I hope you'll keep that in mind as we start off with a little bit of the dry stuff here, some definitions. I'm going to shoot through this pretty quick because you can always come back, look at these definitions or review them if you like. So the arrangement of type, which is what we call typography, involves choosing the typeface and the style, the size, which we call the point size, the line length, which we call the measure, the spacing, which we call the leading, and that comes from the strips of lead that used to be put in type that was used in presses, so it's pronounced leading, not leading. The space between groups of letters or words, which is what we call tracking, and the space between the letters themselves, kerning. The name of a typeface refers to an entire family of letters of a particular design. People tend to use typeface and font, those words interchangeably, but they have two different meanings. A font is one particular instance of the typeface. So a 36-point size of Gothic is a different font from a 24-point size. Construction of type involves the same principles that you've been studying for every design project: tension, unity, contrast, harmony, variety. We look at positive and negative shapes. We look at geometric and organic shapes. Balance is extremely important. The new thing, of course, that is thrown in is legibility. Type also conveys information besides being a beautiful graphic form. So just breaking down the parts of the letter, some of the words that you'll be running into again and again as you look at various typefaces. The serif. A serif is a little thingamajigger that sticks out the top and the bottom of the strokes of a letter. Fonts that don't use serifs, like this here, are called sans serif types. These are a bunch of different styles of serif. The serif comes from the carving process. When a letter was carved in stone on an obelisk or a monument, the chisel had to go in first at a slant, and that little mark that the chisel makes when it goes in is where the serif comes from. Sans serif types, of course, can be very, very elegant and technical. They can also be very silly and handmade looking. Sans serif simply means without serif in French. Script typefaces, sometimes called calligraphic typefaces, are based on the hand-formed letters that calligraphers make. Type families include all the variations of a single typeface. So if you look at these variations of Frutiger, you see the whole type family there. Those are typically designed by the designer or the design team that constructs the original font in the typeface. We measure type size in points, picas and inches. There are 12 points to a pica and 6 picas to an inch. We measure the weight of a type along a continuum that is typically designed for each typeface. The light version of a typeface is quite slender. The heavy or the extra bold is quite fat and weighty. These things give a sense of focus when you see them in a block of normal type. The horizontal measure of letters can be condensed, normal, or expanded. Normal is typically the typeface that is designed to be most legible. Condensed and expanded versions of a typeface are typically designed to solve certain problems, let's say. So obviously typefaces are condensed in order to cram a lot of them into a narrow space. But you do sacrifice legibility when you use condensed and expanded types. The slant, of course, is the incline that we often call italic or oblique. The leading is the vertical space between lines of type. Here you see a very, very generous or open leading, and here you see type that is set tight with almost no, well, really with overlapping space between the type. Even this type here is set with very little leading, and you see the risers and descenders in these letters, in these lines of type, mingling in their space. Now, this is a little bit cool looking, I think. I like the way that the negative shape disappears and becomes very small and important in this very tight set type. But obviously, this is something you would only do in a very small area of display type. You wouldn't set a book this way. No one would read it. Identifying type is something that you may find yourself wanting to do as you become more and more of a type geek. Or if you see type that you would like to use in the project that you're working on, you're going to be asking yourself, what is that and where can I get it? So key letters can be used to identify type. I find that the bowls of the P's and the R's are extremely helpful. The G's are extremely helpful. G's will be very, very different in design, small g's, lowercase g's, from one typeface to the next. Once you get good at it, you know what to look for, and you can compare typefaces fairly easily. But this website called What the Font is extremely helpful. I often go there with a sample of a type that I am not quite sure what it is and have identified it there. Just real quick, we could look and see that this is Arial typeface here. Arial is kind of a Helvetica knockoff. In Arial, you'll notice that the vertical members of the T are slanted, and in Helvetica they are horizontal, and that's how you can always tell which one you've got. So let's talk a little bit about how type and image are related to each other. Probably a lot of you have designed your own letters for fun. And you certainly will have done it in an exercise in this class, of course. This is a place where type and image very, very quickly, the lines between them begin to blur, right? We know that for centuries, people have often approached type as, sure, it conveys meaning, but you can use pictures to make it, right? You can take images and put them together to make the letters you want. You might take a head and a neck, or you might make beautiful abstract images that work together to make a letter, as this beautiful letter from the book of Kells illustrates. The forms in type are really graceful lines and curves, and we can use those graceful lines and curves to draw just as well as we use them to create letters. So these images can go together very, very powerfully, letter forms and drawing forms. Here's an image created entirely out of letters, although I think I might see some numbers in there too. And of course, we're very familiar with this very well-known company that likes to create its name out of images. We can also use those type forms not just as drawing shapes, but we can use them almost like paint to create value. So here you see this artist, although they weren't interested in letting us really read words here, they were more interested in changing the size and distribution of the letters in order to create a sense of value and build up this picture of the woman's face. That image was fairly abstract. You're going to be creating your image right over a photograph, and I have a couple of examples of type superimposed over photographs to show that combination of the message that the words convey with the photograph underneath. Now what you're going to be doing is a little different from this. You're going to work over a photograph to get a likeness, but then you must delete the photographic layer. What you're going to be doing is more similar to what Dylan Roscover is doing here in this portrait of President Obama. And you can see as you look at the way the type has been used that here he cares whether or not we can read the words. We can't read every word, and we won't be able to read every word in your typographical self-portrait either. But the words are very, very important, and they add to our knowledge of the subject and reveal a little bit more of what's on his mind, a feeling of psychological likeness. I'd also like you to notice how those words seem to wrap around the volumes of the head, right? They're not just going from right to left. They are legible, but they are running sideways and curving around and moving over the forms and revealing the forms underneath, very much like cross-contour lines, correct? This would be an example of using type as a line in that sense. In this portrait, you see a very different approach taken. Again, the words are really important, but here the words are very few. They are repeated over and over again. And that's fine with me. If you want to do something like that, you might create your whole portrait using only your name, perhaps, or some words like this that are very important to you. In this case, the words do run from left to right. In many cases, they get so small that it's impossible to read them, but we know what they are because they've been established. And so this is another example of the sort of thing, the sort of approach that you might take, changing the size of the words and the value of them, perhaps, in order to get that feeling of light and shade. Right? So this artist is drawing with the words in a different way, but still creating the feeling of the self-portrait. Beautiful integration of the positive and negative shape here by letting those dark shadows bleed into the negative shape. Now you're going to be using color in your self-portrait if you wish. I suppose that a monochromatic approach would be a very, very narrow subset of an analogous color scheme, but I do encourage you to use a full analogous color scheme because I think it just gives you more expressive possibilities. In this portrait of Mr. T, we see an analogous color scheme, so the artist has used both white and black, but also some warm yellows and oranges, mostly very, very muted, but it still does give a much richer feeling of color to the portrait and a nice feeling of unity because everything is basically warm. I'm showing you a painting here just to give you the idea of what an analogous color scheme with one complementary contrast might look like. So this whole painting is painted pretty much in analogous colors. There is black. There's probably really no pure white, although there is maybe a tiny little bit of white highlight. But there is only one complementary color, and it's this sort of blue color which you see on the model's dress here and in this plate that the fruit is on. So those colors extend the temperature range, I guess you'd say, of this painting. You can do a sort of a thought experiment and think of what the painting would miss or how it would be different if, say, those trimming places on her dress, and if the plate were orange instead of blue, right? Then you would have a full analogous color scheme. You might miss that little, the richness of that complement in there. I'm going to show you a couple of student samples here for this self-portrait project. This one obviously uses the analogous color scheme, and although you are not allowed to have any shapes in your design which are not established with type, just as in the last project, the one exception is that background shape. You may have that background rectangle and fill it for free with any color or any gradient of analogous colors that you like. This is an analogous color scheme with one complementary contrast. So you see that there's a range of blues and purples that are used, and maybe a little bit of black or very, very dark blue that are used to establish the portrait itself, and then one kind of orangey yellow that's been laid almost like a light veil of type over the face and in larger type in the background. So if you like the idea of adding a little more contrast, a little more temperature change, a little more variety to your piece, you may insert that one complementary contrast. I hope that these examples help, and I hope you have lots of fun working on this with the techniques that are illustrated in the rest of this assignment.